let's talk a little bit about etiquette within an online meeting, because it's really, really important that your prospect takes this meeting in a serious way. And a prospect won't take this meeting seriously if you yourself aren't taking this seriously. So you want to kind of avoid any issues where the prospect might kind of be taken out of this kind of zone, the safe space that you're kind of talking them through to discuss their pains, and make sure that you're kind of not ruffling any feathers or doing anything that you possibly shouldn't be doing. And really what's at the heart of this topic is making sure that you're not doing anything that you wouldn't normally do within the space of a face-to-face meeting. So let me ask you this. Would you dress appropriately for a face-to-face meeting in a way that kind of your prospect would expect you? Absolutely. Would you accept any distraction that's going on? Would you accept someone kind of coming in and randomly sitting in the middle of the meeting? No, you absolutely would not. Would you accept them kind of stopping and having a phone call halfway through the meeting? No, you definitely would not. So why is this then to some people's minds, acceptable within an online meeting? Well, it shouldn't be acceptable in an online meeting, and we need to make sure that ourselves as salespeople, we're not kind of committing any of these kind of massive crimes against video meeting kind, all right? So let's break this down a little bit more. What does this mean? Let's start a little bit with time. It's really important that we respect the other person's time. So if we've sat there and said, great, we have an hour set aside for this meeting, and you probably want to stay at the beginning of the meeting as well. We have an hour set aside for this. Is that still the case? Then that we respect that. So you don't say we've got an hour set aside and then take an hour and a half of that time. No, you need to be mindful as you go through the meeting that you have the amount of time that you have set aside for it. I mean, if you finish a little bit early, that's okay. You might be able to sit there and say, look, it doesn't seem like it makes sense for us to kind of do business here, or maybe it does, and they've said, yes, let's do it. It's okay to say, how about I give you some of your life back, and then we can kind of proceed from here. Would that make sense to you? That's absolutely fine. But you wouldn't, have an extra hour bolted onto the end of your meeting, because that's just being massively disrespectful to their time. Or something else you might want to think about as well, distractions. We want to try and minimize the amount of distraction that's going on. So what could this mean? This could mean maybe having a meeting away from the normal kind of parts of our house or office where there is just kind of stuff going on in the background. So you wouldn't want to have a meeting in a communal area like a kitchen or a living room, something like that, where you're likely to be interrupted. Because think about this, if a prospect is discussing some pains that they have, you're really digging into that and saying, what does this mean? What does that mean? What does that mean to you personally? And then someone randomly walks around in the back of the shot, it's just going to look really, really weird. It's going to kind of snap them out of that pain zone that you've kind of got them in, and through some of the brilliant questions that you have been asking. So just try and make sure that you can kind of find a space where you can minimize these. So that could be a spare bedroom, it could be an office. I mean, obviously everyone's a little bit different with this regarding to what facilities they might have, but really, even if it's just a case of closing a door and talking with the rest of the people in your house or office to say, look, I'm about to have this meeting, please don't interrupt me part way through, it can kind of go a long way to making sure that you don't have any of these unexpected distractions. If you do have a distraction that you're not expecting, well, funnily enough, you've got the mute button. The mute button is a really, really useful thing. Within a meeting anyway, you should generally be talking 30% of the time and getting them to talk 70% of the time, because those 30% of the time should be you asking questions realistically. But largely, you want to kind of make sure that the 70% of the time is as uninterrupted as possible. So if something happens where, I don't know, there's a background sound or something you're not expecting, or someone flushes the toilet, something like that, then you can go to the mute button so that it doesn't take them out of this kind of zone that you've kind of got them in as you go through. It's also worth considering that generally for something like Zoom or Skype or something like that, where a lot of the time if there is a sound that then that piece of software goes, oh, they're talking now, because there's sound being made, then it will then switch to them, and then their mic will die, and it's going to be really difficult to pay attention to them. When in actual fact it's just a dog barking in the background, and you could have just muted that. So keep the mute button at the ready, and just make sure that if anything does go horribly wrong, you can just mute that while still paying full attention to what your prospect is saying. That goes also with regards to sounds that might happen off camera that your prospect can't necessarily see. So you wouldn't necessarily want to have them kind of being like in the background there, because the prospect has no idea what's going on at all. If there is any sounds that you have to make, or maybe I know you're sitting there making notes, make the prospect aware of that. Sit there, hold up a book and say, look, I'm going to make some notes during this meeting to make sure that I've kind of recorded what's going on here so that I don't miss anything. Is that okay with you? Then they'll understand if you're looking down from time to time. Likewise, don't sit there with your phone out of shot, just kind of checking emails part way through, because it's really rude, and also it's really obvious what you're doing. People can tell when you're on your phone during an online meeting, and it would not be acceptable acceptable in a face-to-face meeting either. So, keep that to one side and keep that away from you, but just try and not kind of make any strange sounds and stuff out of shot, because it just doesn't seem to be very good, and it's a little bit rude as you go through. In addition to that, make sure that your audio and video gear works before the meeting starts. We've all been there. We've all started a meeting and heard, can you hear me now? Oh, okay, can you see me? Oh, does that make sense? Yeah, that's good. Well, in actual fact, 15 minutes of quick testing to make sure this all works before the meeting started would have made a ton of sense. Just go into your audio visual settings, make sure it's all working okay, and try and minimize and avoid this kind of tech problems, because you don't want to be turning your meeting with your prospect into an exercise in tech support now, do you? No. Finally, one final thing you might want to think about, don't record your meeting without permission. This might sound like an obvious thing to some people, but I myself have had this when I've been in meetings with somebody online and they've just randomly started recording in the middle of the meeting. How can I tell? Because the record icon starts flashing in the corner of the screen. It's really rude, it's a little bit weird, it phases you in a strange way. You're sitting there on the other side of the meeting going, should I bring this up? Should I not? Don't know, not really sure. What's going on here? And it's just really, really bad. It's kind of, to my idea, it's tantamount to turning up to a physical face-to-face meeting and having a camera in the corner just randomly rolling. That would be really strange, really weird, and you'd be sitting there going, what's going on here? Now, we don't want any of these thoughts going on within a meeting that we ourselves are holding, whether that is in a face-to-face format or an online format. So if you really need to record the meeting for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure why, but make sure that you ask permission first and you make sure that they're absolutely okay with that moving forward. But largely, to summarize for this section, just have a think about what would be acceptable in a face-to-face meeting and then apply that to an online meeting format. And ultimately, the pillars of kind of what is acceptable and what is you respecting your prospect's time and attention and kind of intellect is exactly the same whether it's in an online format or whether it's in a face-to-face format. So make sure you're asking yourself these things and make sure that all makes sense and you'll do just fine.